I worked at a grocery store in town. My house wasn't too far from it, so I usually just walk home after work. I had recently gotten moved to this closing shift, which honestly really didn't bother me much. The walk home was only a few blocks anyway, so that's fine. The walk home was mostly uphill through the neighborhood. I knew the route well enough I could probably walk it half asleep. The streetlights were already on when I started walking up the hill. There was someone standing under the first streetlight. They were facing away from me. I couldn't really make out anything else, and I didn't think much about it. I just kept walking. But when I reached the streetlight, nobody was there anymore. I slowed down and looked around for a second. The street was empty. The only thing I could hear was the streetlight humming above me. I figured maybe they just crossed the street while I wasn't looking. So I just kept walking. The next streetlight was further uphill, and there was somebody standing under that one too. Same posture, facing away from me, not moving at all. I stopped walking for a second. The person didn't move, didn't turn around, didn't react at all. I remember slowing down for a second. Then I kept walking, a little faster this time. And just like before, the moment I reached the streetlight, they were gone. I stood there looking back down the hill. The first streetlight was still on, but there was no one around it. That's when I started convincing myself I was just tired, long shift, so my eyes are playing tricks on me. I just really wanted to go home and rest. And so I kept walking. There were only 2 more lights before my street. The next one was empty. I felt glad. I walked past it without slowing down. Then I looked further uphill. Someone was standing under the streetlight right before my turn. This time, they were standing closer to the middle of the sidewalk, like they were waiting, still facing away from me. I stopped walking completely. I remember asking if they were okay. No response. They didn't move at all. Then I heard it. A quiet sobbing. Somewhere near the streetlight. It sounded like someone trying hard not to be heard. I started walking again. Faster. My house was only a few blocks away. I remember looking back while I was walking. The streetlight was still on, but I couldn't see the person anymore. By the time I reached my street, I was basically running. I got into my driveway so fast I almost dropped my keys trying to unlock the door. I got inside and locked the door behind me. I just stood there for a second, trying to catch my breath. After a while, the whole thing started feeling stupid. Like, did I really just panic over somebody standing outside crying? I remember almost laughing at myself. I finally reached for the living room light. Something was standing in the middle of the room, facing away from me, completely still. If you're enjoying the story, subscribing really helps the channel. Anyway, let's keep going. I got called out of third period near the end of class. At first, I thought it was just for something normal. Attendance, paperwork, probably for something stupid. The teacher barely looked at me when she told me to go. The counselor's office was near the east hallway beside the trophy cases. Nobody ever liked getting called there, even if you didn't do anything wrong. The counselor was already waiting when I walked in. Tall guy, always calm. Kind of adult that smiled a lot without actually meaning it. He looked up from his desk when I stepped inside, closed the door. Then he just sat there for a second, watching me while I took the chair across from him. I remember already wanting the conversation to end. He asked normal questions first. How classes were doing, how things were at home, if I've been sleeping okay. I answered everything as quickly as possible because I already knew none of that was the reason I got called here. Then he opened a folder on his desk. You knew Preston? It really wasn't a question. So I said, yeah. Everybody knew Preston. Preston died 3 weeks earlier, but people stopped talking about it pretty fast after that. At least, publicly. The counselor nodded slowly, then asked, Did you two ever have problems with each other? I told him no, which wasn't completely true. Preston used to mess with people constantly, especially when nobody else was around. He liked making people uncomfortable at bus stops, locker rooms, empty hallways after class, stuff like that. Nothing big enough to report, just enough to make you hate being alone with him. The counselor kept nodding while I talked, like he already knew all of it. Then he slid a paper across the desk. We've had a few students come forward. I started reading it. About halfway down the page, I realized what I was reading. They were statements about me. Kids saying that I bullied Preston, that I harassed him, that I threatened him. I was looking at the counselor waiting for him to say that there had been some kind of mistake. But he just sat there calmly, folding his hands together. I told him none of it was true. He nodded again, almost smiling. Okay, he said. Then tell me your side. And so I did. I told him about the bus stop, the comments Preston used to make, the way he acted when teachers weren't around. The counselor listened to the whole thing without interrupting. After I finished, he leaned back in his chair and sighed quietly. I'm sorry you felt that way. Then a few seconds later, but that's not why we're here. After that, he started talking about Preston's parents, how devastated they were, how much they've done for the school, how hard this has all been for everybody. He kept using words like responsibility, closure, accountability. The whole time he sounded so calm. That was the worst part. Like he already knew how this conversation is going to end. Then he pushed the paper closer to me. This never leaves this office. I remember staring at the pen for a long time. Not because I was deciding whether to sign it. I already knew I was going to. I think part of me realized at the moment I walked into that room. The counselor just kept watching me patiently from across the desk. Still calm as ever. Still kind of smiling. Like there really wasn't any other outcome. I finally picked up the pen. The second I finished signing it, the counselor reached over and closed the folder immediately. Then he stood up. Good. You can head back to class. The hallway outside was completely normal. People laughing, lockers slamming, someone running before the late bell. I remember just standing there for a second. Another student was sitting outside the office when I opened the door. His head was down, hands were shaking. There was another folder sitting on the counselor's desk behind me. The counselor smiled at him. Come on in. I've worked night shifts at the hospital for probably around 11 years. After a while, you stop getting surprised by things. You get used to strange things working in the hospital long enough. At least, that's what I used to think. But there's this one patient I'll never forget. Room 14 was part of my usual rounds. Male patient, mid 50s, deep coma. He's been unresponsive for weeks by that point. I checked on him every night. Same routine every time. Check the monitor, check the IV, write everything down. Nothing ever changed. It happened a little after 2 in the morning. Most of the patients were asleep. I was heading toward room 14 during my rounds. Most of the lights in the room were already off by then. I looked through the small window in the door before going in. And the bed was empty. I remember just stopping for a second, trying to process what I'm seeing. Because patients like him, they don't just get up and walk around. At first, I thought another nurse had moved him. Then I looked a little further into the room. I saw someone standing beside the door. So close that I almost didn't notice him. It was a patient, standing completely still in the corner of the room. I remember this awful feeling hitting me immediately. Because he shouldn't have been able to stand. At least not in his condition. Not after weeks being in a coma. I just stood there staring through the window. And after a few seconds, I realized he was muttering something. I thought he was speaking another language. The longer I listened, the less it sounded like actual words, but just sounds repeating over and over. I tried to convince myself there had to be some explanation for this: sleepwalking, urological activity, medical reaction. But none of it made sense. He wasn't stumbling around confused. He was just standing there beside the door, completely still. Then the whispering stopped. The patient slowly turned toward the door. I stepped back from the window. I don't even remember walking away from that room. I just remember suddenly being back at the nurse's station, trying to catch my breath. One of the nurses was typing quietly at the desk. Another was checking charts near the monitors. One of the nurses asked if I was okay. I told her I thought the patient in room 14 was awake. She just frowned and said, "But that's impossible." A few minutes later, another nurse went with me back to the room. The patient was there. He was lying in bed again, exactly how he was supposed to be. The monitor was normal, eyes closed, and no movement. Nothing. The whole time I just kept staring at the patient. I don't know, maybe waiting for him to move again. The other nurse just gave me a strange look. I finished the rest of my shift without going back into room 14 again. The patient died 2 days after. I quit the hospital a week after that. People thought I was burnt out. Too many years working the night shift. Too much stress. I never told them the real reason. Because after that night, I couldn't stop thinking about the next patient, the next room. The next time I look through one of those windows and see somebody standing there, waiting for me.